Okay, so I want to start with a moment that feels, I don't know, ripped right out of a techno thriller. But this actually happened. It's 1994.
Right.
An American journalist, Michael Drosnin, is sitting in this hotel lobby in Jerusalem, and he's frantic. He's trying to get a letter to the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin.
And this wasn't, a letter about policy or some peace treaty.
No, not at all. It was a warning. Drosnin was claiming he'd found this hidden code in the Bible,
Yeah.
a code that's been sitting there for 3,000 years, and it said Rabin was going to be assassinated.
It's a real story. And Drosnin, he actually managed to get that letter to one of Rabin's friends, a poet named Shem Guri. The claim was so specific, too.
That's the part that gets me.
He said that if you looked at the Hebrew text of the Torah, like a giant crossword puzzle, the name Yitzhak Rabin intersected directly with the phrase Ratziach Asher Yitzhak.
Assassin that will assassinate. That just gives me chills saying it. And of course, we all know how the story ends. A year later, November 4th, 1995, Rabin is at a peace rally in Tel Aviv, and he's shot, he's killed.
And suddenly, this really obscure mathematical theory it explodes.
Right. It's not fringe conspiracy stuff anymore. It's all over the nightly news.
It became a huge cultural phenomenon. You have to remember, this was the late 90s. Computers were just getting powerful enough for regular people to run these kinds of complex algorithms at home.
Ah, so it was a perfect storm.
A perfect storm of ancient mysticism and modern computing power. Drosnin's book, The Bible Code, was on the bestseller list for weeks. People were terrified, but they were also just completely captivated.
Well, the idea that history, past, present, and future is already written down somewhere, that's a powerful hook.
It's a very powerful hook.
And that is exactly what we're digging into today. We've got a stack of sources here that go way beyond those headlines. We're looking at the original 1994 paper from a peer-reviewed journal that kicked this all off.
We're also looking at the debunking, which, believe it or not, involved Moby Dick.
I can't wait to get to that. And we're even going to touch on Isaac Newton's obsession with all this, because apparently looking for secret messages in the Bible was a hobby for the guy who discovered gravity.
It was maybe a bit more than a hobby for Newton, as we'll see. But yeah, the mission today is to separate the actual literary devices, the codes, scholars agree, are real, from the statistical illusions.
Because our brains are pattern recognition machines,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes that machine just goes into overdrive.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's ground this before we get into the computer algorithms. I was reading through the notes, and I was surprised to see that there are actual legitimate codes in the Bible, something called atbash.
Yes. If you talk to a serious biblical scholar, they won't roll their eyes at atbash. It's a very old, very well-documented substitution cipher.
So it's like an ancient decoder ring, basically.
That's a perfect way to put it. The name atbash is actually the key. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, aleph, and the last letter, tav. Then the second letter, bet, and the second to last, shin.
Aleph, tav, bet, shin, atbash.
You just flip the alphabet, the first letter becomes the last, the second becomes the second to last, and so on. A becomes Z, B becomes Y.
Simple enough, but why would a prophet, like Jeremiah, why would he use this? Was he trying to hide his message from the authorities? Like a spy?
That's the leading theory, at least for one case. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 25, the prophet is sort of ranting against all these nations that are going to be judged. He lists them off. And then at the end, he mentions the king of Shishak.
Shishak, which, according to historians, isn't a real place.
Exactly. Look at any map of the ancient Near East, you will not find Shishak.
Huh.
But if you apply the atbash cipher to the Hebrew letters, Shin Shin Kafet turns into Bet Bet Lamed.
Babylon.
Babylon, the superpower of the day,
Uh.
the empire that was breathing down their necks. Right, so saying the king of Babylon is going down out loud, that might have been a bit like walking into Moscow in the 1950s and yelling, "Down with the Kremlin." It was dangerous. So he encoded it.
That makes perfect sense.
But there's another layer, too. In Jeremiah 51, he uses the phrase, Lev Kamai. It translates to, heart of those who rise against me.
It's very poetic.
It is. But you run it through atbash, and it spells Kazdim, the Chaldeans, which is another name for the Babylonians. So in that case, it might not just be censorship. It could be a kind of literary flex.
A bit of a word puzzle to make a point.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the baseline. The biblical writers knew about wordplay. They knew about ciphers. That's accepted history. But the 1990s craze, the stuff Drosnin was selling, that wasn't about swapping letters. It was about skipping them.
Correct. And this is where we move from linguistics to mathematics. This is the world of equidistant letter sequences.
I remember seeing the visualizers of this. It turns the text into a giant block of letters, right?
Yeah, imagine you take the entire text of, say, the book of Genesis. You strip out all the spaces, all the punctuation. You're left with this massive single string of 78,064 Hebrew letters.
Wow.
Now, imagine wrapping that string of letters around a cylinder.
A cylinder.
Think of it like a spiral. If you wrap the text really tightly, maybe you have 10 letters per line. If you wrap it loosely, maybe you have 100 letters per line. And by changing the width of that cylinder, letters that were thousands of characters apart in the straight text, they can suddenly end up right next to each other, either vertically or diagonally.
So it's basically a word search puzzle, but you get to change the size of the grid until you find the word you're looking for.
That is the skeptics' view, yeah.
Yeah.
But the proponents, the mathematicians behind that 1994 paper, they argued it was much more than that.
Yeah.
This paper, published in Statistical Science, was a huge deal.
Right, because the authors were serious academics. Rips was a respected math professor.
A very respected professor. And, getting published in Statistical Science isn't easy. They don't usually publish ghost stories. The editors were baffled. They called it a challenging puzzle for their readers.
So what was the experiment? The great rabbi's experiment?
That's the one. They took an encyclopedia of famous rabbis from throughout history, men who lived thousands of years after Genesis was written. They took their names and their dates of birth or death.
And they just looked for those pairs in the grid.
They wanted to see if a rabbi's name and his specific date of death appeared in close proximity in that grid, more often than pure chance would allow.
Yeah.
And when they ran the numbers, they claimed the odds of this happening by accident were 1 in 62,500.
See, that number 1 in 62,500, that's what sold it to the public. That sounds like absolute proof. If I flip a coin and it lands on heads 16 times in a row, the coin is rigged. Same logic.
That was the logic. It looked like irrefutable evidence that some non-human intelligence had encoded these biographical details into the text thousands of years in advance.
But, and I can feel the but coming, this is where the scientific community started to push back. Because the issue wasn't the math, was it? It was the data itself.
It's the classic computer science rule. Garbage in, garbage out. Or maybe in this case, tailored data in, miracle out. The critics identified something they called wiggle room.
This is the part I really wanted to get into. Wiggle room sounds so innocent, but in statistics, it's a killer. So how did they will the data?
Well, think about how we refer to people. If I asked you to find President Kennedy in a text, you could look for Kennedy, JFK, John F. Kennedy, or even President John Kennedy.
Sure, there are lots of options.
Now apply that to ancient Hebrew, which is even more flexible because it often doesn't write out the vowels, and apply it to these rabbis who had titles and acronyms and nicknames.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So if Rabbi Cohen doesn't match up with his birth date in the grid, maybe the Great Cohen does. Or if that doesn't work, maybe just R. Cohen works.
So if you have, say, 20 different ways to write a name and 5 different ways to write a date, you've suddenly got hundreds of combinations to try for each person.
Exactly. And the accusation from the critics McKay, Bar Natan, Bar Hillel, was that the researchers, whether they realized it or not, had made choices. They picked the specific spellings that worked and ignored the ones that didn't.
They drew the target around the arrow after it had already landed.
That's the perfect analogy. But you can't just accuse them of that. You have to prove it. And this leads to my absolute favorite part of the story, the Moby Dick experiment.
The academic mic drop.
It is the ultimate mic drop. Brendan McKay basically said, okay, if your method is valid, it should only work on the Bible. If I run this on any old book, I shouldn't find anything. So he took the Hebrew translation of Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Which is a long book, lots of letters to play with.
A huge haystack. And guess what? He found the same rabbis with the same dates, with the same statistical significance as the Genesis paper.
Okay, so either Tolstoy's God or the method is flawed.
But he didn't stop there. He decided to troll the movement just a little bit. He took the English text of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. He ran the same letter-skipping algorithm on it. And he found predictions for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He found the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He found the death of Princess Diana.
Wait, seriously, in Moby Dick? No way.
Yes. Lady Di intersected with Mortal in These Jaws and Driver. It's spooky if you just look at it. He even found a code predicting the murder of Michael Drosnin, the author of the Bible Code.
Okay, predicting the death of the guy who started the craze that's dark, but it makes the point perfectly.
It proves that if you have a large enough data set, a giant haystack, and you have flexible rules for finding the needle, like skipping letters any which way and choosing how to spell things, you can find anything you want. It's inevitable. It's not a miracle. It's the law of large numbers.
So the magic isn't in the book. The magic is in the math of big numbers.
Yep.
That pretty much kills the prophecy angle for me. But it doesn't kill the human fascination with it. Which brings me to Isaac Newton. We think of him as the ultimate rationalist, the calculus and physics guy. But the notes say he was obsessed with this exact same thing.
Newton is such a fascinating figure. We see him as the first modern scientist, but he was really maybe the last of the magicians. He wrote more about theology and alchemy than he ever did about physics.
Wow.
And yes, he was obsessed with the dimensions of the Temple of Solomon. He was trying to calculate something called the sacred cubit.
What was that about?
He believed that the Bible contained a mathematical cipher from God. He spent years analyzing the measurements of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the temple descriptions. He thought if he could just figure out the exact length of the cubit the Hebrews used, he could decode the timeline of the apocalypse.
Did he? Did he come up with a date?
He did, actually. In a manuscript they found much later, he predicted the world would not end before the year 2060.
2060, that is uncomfortably close.
A little bit. But for Newton, this wasn't superstition. For him, the Bible was data. He believed God was a mathematician, so the text God wrote must be a mathematical puzzle. It's the same impulse that drove those computer scientists in the 90s.
The tools just changed, from quills and pyramids to supercomputers.
But the desire was identical, to find the hidden order in the chaos.
Which brings us to the so what of all this. You've got the skeptics who say it's all random chance, and the believers. But what about theologians? You'd think religious leaders would love this stuff. It proves their book is special. But they haven't been very welcoming, have they?
No, and that's the great irony. Both mainstream Christian and Jewish scholars have, for the most part, rejected the Bible code.
Why is that?
Well, from the Christian perspective, someone like Hank Hanegraaff, a well-known apologist, calls it fortune-telling. His argument is pretty simple. If you're treating the Bible like a crystal ball or a crossword puzzle, you aren't reading it for what it actually is.
You're missing the point.
You're completely missing the point. If you're hunting for submarines and stock market crashes in the text, you're ignoring the Ten Commandments. It trivializes the text.
And what about from the Jewish perspective? They have a tradition of finding meaning in numbers, right? Gematria.
They do, but it's very different. In Gematria, letters have number values. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and so on. But traditionally, it's used to connect concepts, not to predict the future.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The Hebrew word for pregnancy has the numerical value of 271, which is the average number of days in a human pregnancy. So scholars use that to spark discussion or find these thematic links. They don't use it to say buy Bitcoin in 2024.
It's part of that onion concept I was reading about. I love that analogy.
The pardes. The idea that Torah study is like an onion with 4 layers. You have the literal meaning, the hinted meaning, the interpretive meaning, and then the secret mystical meaning.
But the secret isn't a list of assassination dates?
No. The secret is supposed to be a deep theological insight about the nature of God. The Bible code phenomenon feels like it's trying to bypass the first 3 layers and just hack the system for a parlor trick.
It's the desire for a shortcut, knowledge without wisdom.
Exactly.
Wow. So we've gone from a terrifying assassination prediction to a 13th century cipher to a statistical war that involved Moby Dick, and we ended up with Isaac Newton's apocalypse calculator. It's been quite a ride.
It has.
And I think the landing place for me is this idea of pattern recognition. We're hardwired to see faces in the clouds, and when we look at a wall of text, we desperately want it to speak to us.
We do. And I think that's the real lesson here. The fact that we can find prophecies in Moby Dick doesn't mean Moby Dick is a holy book. It means language is just an incredibly complex and flexible thing.
That's the thought I want to leave everyone with. The sheer mathematical flexibility of language. If you have enough letters and enough rules, you can make the alphabet say almost anything.
It really makes you wonder, is the miracle that a code exists? Or is the miracle that we as humans built a system of communication language that is so complex, so dense, that it can inadvertently contain the entire history of the world if you just look at it sideways?
That is a very provocative thought. Maybe the medium really is the message, after all.
I'd encourage everyone listening to try it for themselves. You can find those Moby Dick code arrays online, or just look up a Gematria calculator and type in your name. See what you add up to.
But maybe don't make any major life decisions based on it.
Good advice.
Thanks for guiding us through the Matrix today.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep looking for the patterns, but maybe check your sources before you predict the apocalypse. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.